And joining us right now is Larry Kudlow from CNBC. Also can be heard here on the weekends, right here on WMAL with the Larry Kudlow Show. Larry, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
All right, so I've been looking at my portfolio, as humble as it may be, and I'm not very happy with what I'm seeing. I mean, the stock market over the last week has been very, very soft. What's going on here?
So let's see. How long have you had this portfolio?
Well, I've had it for a while.
So you're probably up, about 155%?
Yeah, I know that it's been up. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm ungrateful, but I worry. I look at it from the perspective not only of my own personal well-being and my wealth. I look at it also from the perspective of what does it say about the state of the economy at this moment.
Well, it's very altruistic of you to think about those things. And all I'll say is stocks fluctuate. Didn't J.P. Morgan once say that? Stocks fluctuate. Something fluctuates in the short run. And, that's all you're getting right now. There's a lot of speculation, as you know, about whether the Fed is going to slow down its bond purchases, the so-called tapering. And I just make an editorial comment on this whole story. A lot of economists on Wall Street, we see them on CNBC, God bless them, they're all telling us, and they're all telling investors, that the second half of the year, the economy is going to be a lot stronger than the first half of the year. That's sort of the general consensus right now, okay? I don't believe it. I don't see any evidence of it. We grew by less than 2% in the first half of the year. I don't see why that's going to change in the second half of the year. And the reason I make that case,
right.
Maybe I'll be right, maybe I'll be wrong, is that, to be honest with you, I think this is the wrong time for the Fed to be injecting less cash into the economy.
All right, but what am I to read into the fact that Walmart slashes its profit forecast by half?
Well, that's one of the reasons that I don't think that the economy is perking up. I think that's a very important factoid. I mean, Walmart came out, lowered their guidance, and they did cut back on their estimates. And, you look at retail sales, it's an important part of the economy. Retail sales is about half of all consumer spending. So then you see a soft number, a mediocre number, very mediocre number. It's about 3%, the core retail sales number, year on year. Big deal, 3%, big deal. And then you get Walmart, and you get Costco, and you get a lot of other retailers. You get like Abercrombie and Fitch and American Eagle and these back-to-school teen department stores. None of them did any good at all. And this is one of the things that I'm pointing out. To me, retail sales is very mediocre. Business capital investment spending is very mediocre. I don't see this big second-half boom at all, and I just think there's altogether too much panic about the Fed. I think the Fed should be extremely cautious, extremely cautious. I may not approve of what they've done, but they've done it, okay, this whole business about QE and buying bonds. But now, if they try to pull back, which is their stated policy, and I'm sure they will in the next year, I think they should be very, very, very careful. And I don't think there's a great case for the Fed to do that.
Larry Kudlow, the president's back in town from his vacation. Congress will be back in about 10 days, I think, or 2 weeks. And one thing the president has said that he wants to do in his upcoming battles with Congress over the debt ceiling and over continuing resolution to keep the government going is to take some of the sequester cuts and reinterpret those into tax increases on the rich. You point out in your National Review article that his approval rating is really low on the economy, down to 35%. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about this whole idea of raising taxes on the rich and how the president has a blind spot with regard to the John F. Kennedy tax cuts on wealthy Americans.
Yeah, well, it's funny. He's been making this case. First of all, he hates the sequester because the sequester won't let him spend. So the era of big spending is over for Obama.
And meanwhile, the deficit is really showing improvements because of these cuts.
That is correct. The sequester has worked. That plus some better tax revenues. We are in some kind of modest recovery situation. So, yeah, his brilliant idea is let's close loopholes and deductions on the upper end people, so-called rich, but let's not cut their tax rates on the other side. He calls that tax reform. I call that tax hikes. And I believe he just wants to use the money to spend for his pet projects. You know, he argues, this is this weird argument he makes about building the middle class building out the middle class, improving the middle class. Okay, that's great. And he goes back and he looks at the period right after World War II. And he said those were the halcyon days, the 1950s and the 1960s, when middle-class people had it really well because, get this, because tax rates were high. You know what the top tax rate was? It was 91%. So if you go back and you actually look at the numbers, the post-war economy was lousy. It was a 2% growth rate from about 1945 to 1960. In the Eisenhower 50s, there were 3 recessions. 3. This is a 91% top tax rate. My point in that article was it was the JFK tax cuts when he slashed the tax across the board, 91 to 70 at the top, and he cut every tax rate, the middle and the lower end. He also cut the corporate tax rate, and that's when the economy boomed by about 5%, and that's what gives you a decent number for the whole post-war period. Yeah. In other words, the president's history is very flawed.
You know what concerns me, though, is that all of this is happening at a time when businesses are starting to pull back because of their concern about Obamacare. I mean, NBC did a piece the other day, and I keep talking about this because I'm stunned that the mainstream media actually picked up on this story, that they interviewed 20 different employers, and every one of them said that they're pulling back on the hours of employees. Right. Now, that comes at a really bad time, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. It's a really important point. It's good that some of the mainstream networks are doing this now to show people. You know, this is the argument. 30 hours worked is the cutoff point, okay? So if you hit 30 hours worked per week, not 40, which is what we do in America, but 30, then you have to be forced into the Obamacare system, which means you're going to have to pay a lot higher insurance premiums. You're going to get a lot less for your money, particularly younger people. Companies don't want to have to be saddled with the expense of higher insurance premiums. So they are stopping you out at the 29th hour. That's what's happening. They're also, by the way, if they're a little bigger, will stop you out at the 50th person hired. So this is a great inhibition on employment. This is a tremendous inhibition on employment.
Last thing we need right now.
It's the last thing we need right now, because what you want is working more hours at higher wages.
Exactly.
What you're getting is working fewer hours at lower wages, which drags the economy. These are all reasons. Now, I think you guys are dead on. These are all reasons why I don't see the second half boom, and why I think the Federal Reserve better be very, very, very careful in what they do here.
All right. Larry Kudlow.
That's the big issue.
We got to leave it there.
Stock correction is happening.
Larry Kudlow wearing his bear costume for the second half of the year. Host of the Kudlow Report on CNBC, and, of course, the Larry Kudlow Show right here on WMAL Saturdays at 7 p.m.